I think you could pull off the long hair.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation, Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home, and Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hours, we're going to talk a lot about what's going on with the New Orleans Saints as they prepare for training camp. We'll touch a little bit on the New Orleans Pelicans, and we got a treat for you tonight. It's Ladies' Night on Inside New Orleans Sports, a New Orleans first, a panel of young ladies who cover sports here in New Orleans, and we are so happy to have both guests who are returning, Rachel Whittaker of NOLA.com and Katherine Terrell of NOLA.com. Ladies, welcome. Welcome to the program. How does it feel to be in part of groundbreaking television?
Wonderful.
Pretty
Thank
good.
you so much.
I've been wanting, you guys know I've been wanting to do this for a while. We finally were able to get your schedules together, and I'm glad
I know,
to have
it kind of
both
took a while.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
okay. We knew we were going to get to it before camp. I'm glad we were able to do it. And we always like to start off talking a little bit about what you guys are involved in. And Rachel, we'll start with you. Tell the folks a little bit about what's happening at NOLA.com and what your responsibilities are.
Well, I am a sports reporter, and my emphasis is largely in video work. I host our daily Saints show called Black and Gold Today that airs Monday through Friday during football season. So we've had a little bit of a break, but once training camp starts again, it'll be full speed. And I also host a twice a week LSU sports show. So those are my main responsibilities.
And Katherine?
Oh, don't remind me about training camp. It's only 2 weeks away.
Katherine's on the beat.
Yes.
So you'll be there. You'll be up in West Virginia.
Yes, I cover the Saints, so I will be at training camp for, I think it's about, 3 weeks?
Yes. Not looking forward to it, Katherine?
No, I am. I just like my vacation. It's very calming.
Hey, you'll get some nice weather up in West Virginia.
And I've never been to West Virginia, so, it'll be interesting.
It is a resort.
Yeah, I know. They have some nice spas, I
They
heard.
have spas. You can get pampered. I'll be interested to see how many of the players get a chance to get pampered.
Right.
And you see, you could be turning over and looking over and going, wait a minute, I'm in the spa. There's Drew Brees. Well, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Well, I can guarantee you they will probably be on the golf course.
Yes.
I will be in the golf cart watching them play golf.
Right.
That's about as close as I get to the golf course.
I think it's going to be pretty interesting. We're going to talk about West Virginia in just a little while. Because I have you ladies here, one of the things I wanted to kind of ask, we talked a little bit about when you guys first came on. And again, it's a changing medium now. So many women now are involved in sports where we only had a few way back when, in the 70s when they really kind of broke into sports television, into sports radio. I was telling you, Rachel, before the show started, I was actually, and look, I was nothing more than a glorified board op, and I answered the telephones for Mary Foster Sports, which was obviously a female talk show host, the former AP writer here in New Orleans who passed a couple years ago. She had a sports show on WNOE AM 1060 back in the early 80s. We did the Archie Manning show, and she had a nightly sports show. Tom Bagwell, who's on this station, was the executive producer of that show, and it was kind of groundbreaking. I think she was the first female host to have a nightly sports show in the country at that time. That was the early 80s, so it was pretty groundbreaking, and she was a pretty knowledgeable individual when it came to sports and well respected by both men and women that were in the business. What about you guys? What have you aspired to be? Is this something you've always wanted to do, sports, first of all? Is that something, Rachel, as you got into it, you always wanted to be in sports, whether it be writing for the paper, whether it be doing what you're doing with the video? Mm-hmm. How about yourself? Tell us a little bit about that and your influences. Let's say your influences outside of the professional business.
Right. Well, there was never a doubt in my mind that I wanted to have a career in sports media. Since I was about 6 or 8 years old, my dad has taken me to Saints games, and I have just one other sister, and she doesn't really care for sports. So he was thrilled that I took an interest in it. And today I am a vice president of the Association for Women in Sports Media, and our mission is to cultivate interest among female sports journalists and kind of just foster foster creativity and passion in each other to try and advance in our careers.
Right.
And so I've met a lot of pioneers in the business through that organization. Christine Brennan over at USA Today, she's been a big influence.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, being a woman today, it's not as difficult as it was back when they had to really pioneer women
Yes.
in the industry. And I know Katherine probably understands that well, yeah.
Katherine, how about you? Now, your dad was a big influence, as you mentioned.
Yes,
A
yes,
huge influence.
exactly.
How about you, Katherine? What got you drawn to sports and eventually wanted to get in and write a column or be a beat writer for a sports team?
Well, I guess I kind of was a lot like Rachel. My dad started taking me to LSU games when I was probably 4 years old. I remember being 11 or 12 and people my age didn't care that much about the games, but I would sit there and really intently watch them. But as far as getting into journalism, I always knew I'd probably do something with reading or writing. I was that kid who used to read at night with a flashlight under the covers, and I've always loved to write. So in college, it just kind of came down to, did I want to write news, or did I want to write sports for the paper? And I ended up in sports, and I just loved it. It doesn't feel like a job to me. It's been great. Kind of like Rachel said, there's been so many people in front of us that have kind of pioneered and led the way that it's not so unusual for a girl to be in the locker room anymore. Now, granted, most of the time I'm still the only girl in the locker room, but it's not a situation where people tell us that we can't be in there. It's just, it's normal. So it's just interesting how much things have changed even 10 years, 20 years.
Oh, yeah. And it's moving faster and faster, no doubt about it.
Yes, definitely.
What about influences? And I've talked to both you guys off the air, and I think, Rich, we talked about it the last time you were on, but maybe some influences, some women in the business that influenced you, if there are any, that made you want to say, you know what, I'd like to get into sports journalism.
Definitely. Well, being a woman in this industry can be very, very difficult in a sense, but it's also empowering, and that's something that I really enjoy about it. And some influences with my video work, I've looked at some women on the broadcast side, like Rachel Nichols. She now has her own show on CNN, so that was impressive. And locally, a woman like Jennifer Hale, who wears so many different hats with her work at Fox, and also I mentioned Christine Brennan. I mean, what a pioneer there. She was one of the first founders of Awesome, and also Susan Fornoff. She was the rat lady. I don't know if you know about that.
No, I don't, but
yes, she was sent a rat in a box by a pitcher from the Oakland.
That's
from
right.
the
I do
Oakland
remember
Athletics.
that story. Yes.
Yeah. So she was one of Awesome's Pioneer Award winners this year. So, and just hearing her talk about that, and she's just so excited to have the number of women passionate about sports today. So it's great.
How about you, Katherine? Any particular female that maybe influenced you?
It's funny. I guess coming into the business, I never necessarily thought about it like that. Never really thought about it like I was a girl going into sports. It was just something I wanted to do, and I just wanted to be a sports reporter, or be a reporter, not the girl in the room or the girl sports reporter. But Rachel did mention Christine Brennan, and that's someone I really admire. She went through a lot, because whenever she started out, it was very different. To have someone in the locker room was a lot more uncomfortable, I'm sure. I really admire people that will go out on their own and do that, so that 15 years later, for us, we don't even think of it as a big deal, so that we can think of ourselves as just reporters and not, female sports reporters.
Yes. Now,
really
you guys have a little bit of history together, going back to college, right?
Yeah, we do.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, we were on the Daily Reveille, the newspaper at LSU sports staff together. So I think there might have been, maybe one other woman on the staff, but other than that, we really held down the fort.
I think we worked together, 3 years?
Yeah.
We've known each other a long time.
Yeah, and we
6
started
years
at
now.
NOLA.com at the same time.
Right,
So,
and guys are loving what you're doing now at NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune as well.
Yeah, it really is. We've found our niche, I think.
We're glad to have you, and we're glad to have you tonight here on Inside New Orleans Sports. Let's talk a little bit about the sports that's going on right now, especially what's going on with the Saints. 866-3200 if you'd like to join the conversation. Again, Rachel Whittaker, Katherine Terrell are our guests tonight. They'd love to answer your questions or get involved in your comments. Jimmy Graham. I'm so tired of talking about Jimmy Graham.
The buzzword of the offseason.
I am just sick of talking about Jimmy Graham, but we got to talk a little bit about it. Obviously, they lose the grievance hearing at this point. He's ruled a tight end. He now is in a situation where it's going to be $7 million a year, a little bit over $7 million a year if he has to play under the franchise tag. Has until Monday to appeal it to the 3-judge panel. Their determination, if it goes to them, will be binding. Doesn't look like it's going to go in that direction because it's, again, we've only got 5 days as we go live with this show before the deadline for Jimmy Graham to sign a long-term deal, or he will have to play under that tender. If he chooses not to sign the tender, it'll be week 10 before he can come back and play for this team. Rachel, I'll take you first. What do you think was going to happen with Jimmy Graham? Will it be a long-term deal? Will they appeal the ruling of Stephen Burbank? What do you think happens here?
I think they'll get a long-term deal done. Pretty. I would probably put a 99% on that. You know, just it would be silly for them for Jimmy and his camp to appeal the ruling at this point. You know, I mean, when Drew Brees was going through the battling over a long-term contract, you know, they took it down to the 11th hour, but they got it done, and this team can't afford not to have Jimmy for the whole season. So I think they'll get it done. It might take until 2:30 on July 15th, but you know, it'll happen.
Right. Katherine, what can you add? Do you think that there will be a long-term deal done, or he'll play under that tag?
Well, I know that the Saints offered him a contract before the season started that eclipsed Rob Gronkowski's deal, but basically, I think that Jimmy's camp wanted him to play out the season and kind of prove that he was worth more than that. And I think that he did, you know, looking at his body of work, he was our biggest red zone threat, and, you know, he led all receivers in the NFL in touchdowns, which is pretty big. But contract talks kind of broke down until now, you know, now they're talking again. And I think that if they cannot reach an agreement, he probably would be willing to hold out, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think that they're probably not too far away on their numbers. They can't be. You know, I think that the top number he's going to get is $12 million, and that's Mike Wallace numbers.
Right.
But they'll probably settle in between 10.5 and 12, I would think.
Per year is what you're saying.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, per year. You know, and that's the highest paid amount for a tight end, and you know that mid-range wide receiver number. So I mean, I think that they're going to come to an agreement. Like Rachel said, it'll be last minute, but
Right.
I would definitely think that it would happen.
You know, I've talked about where I think the numbers are. 5 years, probably somewhere between 55 and 60 million, 25 to 30 million guaranteed with a 20 to 25 million dollar signing bonus. Ladies, do you agree with that? Does that look like maybe that's ballpark on where the numbers will be?
I do think so. I mean the Saints, they've said that they're going to make him the highest paid tight end ever, and they absolutely should. So at this point, it's just a matter of getting the numbers and the length of the deal exactly right. But it'll happen.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds about right. I think that they might come down to quibbling over signing bonus and things like that. But, you know, like I said, I just don't think that there's that big of a range of numbers that would prevent them from doing a long-term deal. I mean, that's the worst-case scenario. The Saints don't want to have a $7 million cap hit this year.
No.
They're barely under the cap right now. They don't want that. You know, Graham doesn't want to sit out this season.
No.
He loves playing with Drew Brees, and
They surely don't want that either.
yeah, of course. Who does?
Right.
So,
Right, yeah.
you know, NFL players just don't sit out the season. They just don't. And I mean, like I said earlier, he would probably be willing to if they really don't reach the number that he wants. But I think that, you know, something's got to give, and it will.
Well, and again, when you look at this, if he was to play under the tag this year, the Saints have the right to tag him next year. You know, he'd get $14 million, but that would be $14 million over 2 years, where ultimately, you know, he can get at least guaranteed somewhere in the $20 to $25 million range. And then for the Saints, they want something that's cap friendly, something they can spread over the life of the deal. So there's a reason for both of these entities to come together and hammer out a deal. And again, Graham's got pretty good representation. They understand what's at stake here.
Jimmy Sexton knows what he's doing.
Boy, doesn't he, huh?
Yeah.
But the Saints can't afford to tag him again next year. A lot of the cap numbers take a massive jump next year, and then the year after that. So the Saints are going to be scrambling again next year.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're going to have Cameron Jordan. Who's
and you know, Jari Evans' number goes up,
exactly.
and Brees' number jumps massively over the next 2 years. So they we're going to be right back here next year.
Oh, yes, we will be.
So
yes, we will be.
It'll be interesting as always.
866-3200 is the phone number. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guests tonight, Rachel Whittaker and Katherine Terrell of NOLA.com, to Hunter in Metairie. Hunter, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports.
How you doing? And as always, your show is one of the most interesting in my opinion. I'm just going to ask one question. I wanted to ask each of you what you think the New Orleans Saints football team's record will be this year and why. And I'm going to hang up.
Hunter, thanks for the phone call.
Oh my, wow. Nothing like looking ahead to the start of the season, that's for sure. I think that the Saints have as good a chance. I mean, they are serious contenders this season. You know, especially I love the moves they made on defense this offseason. You know, they really made a splash. I mean, who would have thought them acquiring Jarris Burt? I mean, right away signing him to his contract.
Yes.
I mean, that was a huge move. But if I had to pick right now, I mean, their schedule is very doable in terms of wins. So maybe 11-5.
11-5?
I'd say something like that.
Katherine?
Yeah, I do agree with that. 11-5 is kind of my number 2 because the division is very interesting this year. It can either be very good and improved or very bad. The Panthers will probably be worse. They lost so many people. Right. The Bucks could be better, but they might not be there yet. The Falcons, I think, should go back to being a decent team under Mike Smith. I think last year was an anomaly. But then they've got some difficult games at Chicago at night. That's really tough game. Yeah. You know, they got to play the Ravens, they got to play the Packers.
Yes.
But, you know, all that being said, I think this team is extremely talented. And if their defense plays like they did last year and they can kind of, you know, this is unusual to say for the Saints, but if they can get their offense going a little bit more, I think that they're going to have a good year.
Right, and they have those 3 home games in a row in November, and that's going to be huge.
That's going to be big. You know, I'll say right now, today, without any injuries, saying Jarris Burt's going to come back 100%. 11, 12 wins, not out the realm of
no, not at all.
And maybe 13. I mean, again, if you really want to push it, again, a lot of things have to fall in place for that to happen. But they are as good as any team on paper right now in the NFL. Would you guys agree with that?
They just got to win on the road.
Yeah,
that's their problem.
Winning on the road and forcing more turnovers. They've got to do that. They talked a lot about that during OTAs and minicamp.
Back to Jimmy Graham for a few more minutes. Katherine, I'll take you first. What are your thoughts on the arbitrators' ruling? The Saints were kind of upset on the ruling in terms of how many yards a tight end is away from the tackle. They didn't want it to be limited there. The tight end position is evolving. They felt that was an incorrect ruling on the part of arbitrator Stephen Burbank. What are your thoughts overall? I
did think that was a little strange. That might be the best word for it. I do understand the Saints' position there because they don't want to be back here again a year from now, 2 years from now, you know, quibbling over what is a tight end or, you know, even on the other side, another position saying that they want to be paid more. So I understood. A lot of people were thinking that's kind of weird that they would be unhappy. Obviously, they're happy they're ruling, but some of his reasons were just interesting.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people pointed out the Twitter bio, and I just thought that was such nonsense.
Right.
It's so irrelevant, but, you know, there it was in the ruling that was a reason why he ruled against them.
Yes.
So, but ultimately, I think that he made the correct ruling. He is a tight end that is used in a variety of ways and sometimes lined up as a wide receiver.
Yes, I would agree. Rachel, what can you add?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything Katherine said. I mean, it doesn't, honestly, I mean, I don't think it really matters why he ruled it. I just think it's a matter of, like, right now, in terms of Jimmy's situation, getting a long-term deal done ASAP.
Right.
You know, it's just a matter of he's a tight end, and if you look at what he's done, you know, 70 of his catches came against defenders other than cornerbacks, and that was something that we talked about. Yes, his numbers are right up there with the leading receivers of the NFL, but where he makes plays on the field and against whom he makes plays on the field is something as well. You know,
and I'll say this: I think, and we're going to talk about this. Brandon Cooks, his impact will help Jimmy Graham. When you start looking at a wide receiver core across the board, you're in a situation where I think they got more speed on the field now. and that's going to help Jimmy Graham. No longer will they have a situation where a corner is going to be lined up against Jimmy Graham because of the amount of speed that at least right now on paper will be on the field.
I definitely agree. So many people focused on Graham's bad games and, oh, he didn't have catches in this game or he didn't have touchdowns. But what a good player does is draw coverage away from the other players, allowing the rest of the team to make plays. And adding a player like Brandon Cooks, even if he's not necessarily doing anything on the play, it's just going to help.
Yes.
I mean, it's just going to help the rest of the team because just like you said, he's so fast. They're going to have to be watching him on the field at all times, and I think this is a guy that can make an impact right away. So I think that this offense should be better for it. I mean, they should be pretty good this year.
Well, you can throw Stills in there as well. I mean,
exactly.
You know, again, if you're concentrating on a guy like Cooks, all of a sudden you got a guy that's just as, he's not as fast, but just as fast.
Or Joe Morgan, maybe.
Right, or Joe Morgan if he comes back. We'll talk about that as well. Rachel, what are your thoughts there? I mean, do you think that with the addition of the upgraded speed at wide receiver, that helps Jimmy Graham in terms of not having to deal with those corners anymore?
Right, absolutely. I mean, I thought the Saints selection of Brandon Cooks was awesome, especially with the loss of Darren Sproles. You know, he'll be able to add some of that speed, not just with Drew in the huddle, but in the return game as well. That's gonna be huge. And I mean, look what Kenny Stills did in the deep receiving game, leading the league in yards per reception.
Right.
That was huge. And we thought Joe Morgan was gonna have that role before he got hurt in the off season. But yeah, I think those two names right there, and then maybe we'll see an undrafted guy come on and make the team, and of course Marcus Colston. I mean, Mr. Reliable there. When he's healthy, he's one of Drew's best targets.
Yes, you know, guys, when they drafted Brandon Cooks, one of the first things I talked about was they would utilize him a lot. Would they utilize Sproles, even though he's not a running back? You may see him carry the ball some out of the end around, like we saw with Devery Henderson and a few other players, Meacham early in his career. But they're going to move him around a lot. You guys got a chance to see him up close and personal during minicamp and OTAs. And Rachel, I'll take you first. Everybody I've talked about said the first thing that just stuck out to him is speed, speed. About how quick, you know, again, wasn't full pads, but how fast he was on the field.
Yeah, it really, they're absolutely right. I mean, the second we saw him catch a pass and even do some returns, it was like, wow, okay, the Saints knew what they were getting, and it's going to be so important to be able to have that, and defenses having to account for that. I mean, they thought maybe, with Sproles gone, you know, that those weapons are going to be gone from the Saints team, but I mean, with Cooks, I mean, I see potential offensive rookie of the year right there. Yeah.
Catherine, what can you add? I mean, did that stick out to you like the rest of the reporters that were there? I mean, when he got on the field, I mean, he had fresh legs now, but the speed.
Well, I've only seen him in one practice, but the play that stands out to me was he was running down the sideline with Keenan Lewis chasing after him, and you could tell he was kind of playing with Keenan. I mean, and Keenan's not a slow guy.
Not at all.
He looked like at any second he could turn on the burners even more, and Keenan was trailing probably 3 yards behind him. So you could tell, I mean, he's got speed. When he was back returning punts, I was watching him and Travaris Cadet, and he just looked very fluid, making his cuts, you know, returning those punts more so than Cadet. He just looks like a natural out there. So, you know, one practice, but I think that they've got something there.
What role do you think that he will be utilized in with the Saints? Obviously, he's a wide receiver, but will he be a multi-purpose player for them?
Oh, I definitely think so. I think that they love having players that they can put all over the field, you know, just like we were talking about, like Darren Sproles, and that's the biggest comparison that's been made. I think that even Cooks wants to tone down the comparisons a little bit just because, you know, it gets to be endless. But, you know, that's what it is. People see him as Sproles' replacement, and not many players can be Darren Sproles, but I think that they're going to try.
That's about the closer you're going to get to it. Rachel, what can you add?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, I think once the season starts, Cooks will show in live game action, will really show what he can do. But I mean, the Saints saw what they wanted in a guy like him, and yeah, I mean, he was only able to come to just that one practice.
Right.
He had to start late because of school, but but he's going to add a lot to this receiving core.
I would agree. Let's talk a little bit more about the receiving core, and specifically when you start looking at that fourth wide receiver position. Robert Meacham in the mix. Nick Toon had a pretty decent OTA mini camp.
Yes, he
A
did.
lot of people are thinking that he's going to emerge this year. Joe Morgan, right now, a lot of people are kind of wondering, you know, what's wrong with Joe? He hasn't really come back from the knee injury yet.
Right, not at all.
Katherine, what do you think? Who do you think ends up as that fourth wide receiver, and why?
Well, it's 3 people competing for 2 spots, or more than 3 people, but really just 3. Joe specifically, you know, I think that so many players are returning faster and faster from ACL injuries now that people almost expect it. So the fact that he's not on the field yet maybe surprised some people, but really it hasn't even been a year yet, and they're planning for training camp. I think they just didn't want to take that chance that he could get injured again when he wasn't 100%. You know, Nick Toon has looked good. Even Meacham has looked good during OTAs, you know, taking those reps that Morgan's not getting and things like that. But one of them is going to be the odd man out. If I had to guess, I would say it's Robert Meacham. I would say that even if Morgan's been hurt, they see a lot of potential in him. And they would probably want to take a chance on a younger guy like him and Nick Toon, who didn't get much playing time last year simply because he was, you know, a 5th receiver. But that's going to be a camp battle to watch for all of them.
One of the big battles, and we're going to talk about some of those other battles as we go forward. Richard, what can you add to that? When you've taken a look at some of these players, you kind of know the history, what's going on there. What do you think is going to happen with that fourth wide receiver position?
Yeah, I agree with Katherine that Meacham could be the odd man out of those 3 guys. I mean, Nick Toon just hasn't had a chance to make it. I mean, he's been hurt, which is so unfortunate for him. But he had some nice hands and made some good catches during OTAs and minicamp.
And underrated with his speed as well.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the one thing about him. People want to compare him to Marcus Colston, but he's a faster Marcus Colston. The problem is inconsistency in catching the ball and can't stay healthy.
Right. Yeah. If you can't stay healthy, I mean, Colston's had some health issues himself, but I mean, again, a guy like him, Drew can just the chemistry between Drew and Marcus. You can see it on the field, and both being with the Saints since 06.
Andy Tanner have a chance to make this team? Everybody wants to talk about Andy Tanner being the heir apparent to Lance Moore. I think that they've kind of moved on from that, at least the fan base a little bit. But what about Andy Tanner? I mean, you know, this is last hurrah on the practice squad.
Right.
He can't be on the practice squad anymore. So
That's true. Yeah.
Oh, that's gonna be tough. I know, you know, more than any other player that made the team last year, people were most excited about Andy Tanner, and I think that fizzled out very quickly.
Yeah.
You know, with Meacham coming back, he didn't get a chance. But I just think it's gonna be hard for him to compete with those guys, and that's nothing against Tanner. It's just they have, like I said, 3 very good receivers competing for 2 spots, and it's going to be very tough for him to beat one of those guys out. Yeah. So I would say he probably is not going to make the roster, which is unfortunate. But, you know, that's the nature of the business.
Sometimes, you've already got good people right there. It's going to be really hard to usurp any of them, I would think.
5 receivers, 6 receivers, what do they carry, do you think?
I think they carry 5.
5? Yeah, I would think so as well. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports each and every Thursday night right here on WLAE TV with our live broadcast at 6 p.m. We have a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night at 10 o'clock on WLAE and Pelican Sports Television in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Got a great panel for you tonight. All ladies panel for you tonight. It is a New Orleans first. If it's not, we're going to say it is, but I'm almost positive it is. Rachel Whittaker and also Katherine Terrell of NOLA.com. We'll take a quick pause. Stay tuned. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation, Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home, and Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital is literally saving kids' lives.
It's a very special place, friendly place.
To see the kids that they're helping on a daily basis was unbelievable.
Families never receive a bill from St. Jude.
Discoveries made at St. Jude are freely shared.
The hardest cancer cases in the world go to St. Jude. We won't stop until no child dies from cancer.
Join us.
Join us
in supporting Hoops for St. Jude.
Visit stjude.org/hoops to find out how.
You're watching WLAE, New Orleans Public Television. Find us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Rachel Whittaker and Katherine Terrell join us from NOLA.com. 866-3200 is the phone number if you'd like to get involved in the conversation. Ladies, the rest of the draft. Katherine, I'll take you first. Any player you think is going to make an impact this year? Is it a Stanley Jean-Baptiste? Is it Carrie Fort, Vinny Sinceri, Ronald Powell? Any of those guys, maybe, although a lot of people don't think Rooks is going to make an impact. Any of those guys make an impact outside of Cooks?
I think a lot of them are long-term project players, if that makes sense. Even Jean-Baptiste, he's going to have trouble cracking that number 2 corner spot with such a crowded group. But I think that Payton wanted a lot of them to make their impact on special teams. And, I say that, and I'm sure that one of them will be a surprise. Whether it's Fort or Sinceri or whoever.
Anybody stick out to you in camp? I know it's hard. Yeah. It's T-shirts, it's helmets, and it's shorts, but still, and especially defensive guys, but just a lot of guys coming off, all these guys coming, for the most part, we look at Fort, Sinceri, and Powell coming off of injury. Anybody kind of stick out to you and say, well, man, this guy might be able to stick?
Honestly, not many of them made a huge impression on me, but, it is early. Jean-Baptiste did make some nice plays, though. I think he had a strip at one point or an interception. So, he has his moments. I think there's a strong learning curve with him. He has a lot to learn. But, he's in a great position to do it. But the rest, that's probably going to have to wait till training camp. It all tends to blend together.
Yeah, no, it does. Richard, what could you add? Anybody stick out to you? Any of these young rookies that you think can make an impact outside of maybe situational depth and special teams?
Right, yeah. Katherine mentioned that good play by Stanley Jean-Baptiste. That was, I believe it was an interception during minicamp or OTAs. But yeah, I was surprised that the Saints took chances almost really on players who had some injuries. I mean, with Powell and Fort specifically, and I believe Sinceri
just came off an injury as well.
Yeah. So that really surprised me. But again, I mean, that cornerback spot is something I'm watching. I just don't think that Stanley's going to be able to crack it in there. And I mean, the linebackers, the Saints pass rush was very, very strong last year. So yeah, these guys, Fort and Powell, could.
I can see why they went with Fort. Again, you've got two guys that are going to be making a lot of money in Hawthorne and Lofton. Two guys that are not getting up in age. They're still fairly young players. They're not old players, but their salaries escalate. And yeah, they are. And you're taking a look at a guy that maybe down the line is a guy that can play that inside linebacker for you. When you look at Powell, there's a reason there as well. You've got some guys that are on that defensive line that are pass rushers that you may not be able to afford coming up. Junior Gillette, obviously, he has a big year. He can opt out of his deal. You got a situation where you got one more year with Cameron Jordan now because of the little quirk with the collective bargaining agreement that give him the 5th year. But again, you got to look down the line here, and he's proven he can be a pass rusher in the SEC when healthy. And a lot of the big unknown for me is Vinny Sinceri. This is a guy that was a ball hawk for Alabama. He can turn the ball over. He's a coach's son, and I think a lot of these guys will be situational depth in the beginning, but I think there's a place for each one of them on this team, and they needed to upgrade the special teams because they've lost a lot of veterans that played a lot on the special teams.
Exactly right. Yeah. So that's the shot for these guys, to prove that they're what they're worth.
Right, especially Harper, Jenkins, those guys were mainstays on special teams. They're gone now, so some of these guys got to fill in.
It definitely makes sense. If you look at needs for the team, they filled their need at wide receiver, they filled their need at cornerback, and their next really big need was to fix the special teams. And like you said, a lot of these guys are going to contribute just at that spot for the most part this year, and special teams is just as important as anything else. It was a team need, and I think they went out and filled it. So while it may have looked people may have been surprised by some of the picks, I think that it all kind of makes sense if you really think about what the team needed this year.
Yes. I'm excited about the defense, and I'm excited because they've added some playmakers. You mentioned a little bit earlier, Rachel, the addition of Jairus Byrd, if healthy. Now, again, from what we understand, I learned this last week from one of our guests that said that the surgery that Byrd had is the same surgery that Tiger Woods had, and Tiger Woods had a little bit of a problem getting back into the, and no pun intended here, folks, the swing of things on the golf course. So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to come back. I'll take you first, Katherine. Do you think Byrd will be back for training camp, or is this a situation that maybe they're going to ease him in and they want him ready for the first game of the year?
Well, they've told us training camp. I don't know too much about his injury or his surgery because I still haven't talked to Byrd himself, which hopefully I'll get a chance to do soon. So it's very hard to say. But Peyton didn't sound too concerned about it. Now, he didn't sound too concerned about Victor Butler last year either, right before we found out that he had a torn ACL. Yeah. And the next day, his ACL was torn. But, you know, he's a very expensive acquisition who I'm sure they would like to get on the field as soon as possible. No matter what they're saying, that's got to be a little worrisome. But I think that Byrd has missed parts of training camp in the past, and it worked out just fine for him. So I think that he's the type of player that it would be okay if he wasn't there all of training camp. But that's obviously worst case scenario.
Yes, I would agree. Exactly. Rachel, you mentioned it early in the you're really excited about Byrd. Are you worried that he will not be ready to go? And is it a problem if he's not ready to go during training camp?
I think it might be a little bit of an issue if he's not ready to go. Like, I mean, like Katherine said, Sean Payton, he came out and said it after one of their practices. Oh, by the way, Byrd had some procedure on his back.
Kind of nonchalant.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, but I mean, they've said training camp. I mean, if he can't get back, I mean, obviously the Saints want to have him in there so that he can get going with the secondary. Yes. Of course, it was smart, you know, to hold him out, you know, during these OTAs and minicamp. But you know, with him and then with Champ Bailey coming in at corner, I mean, those younger cornerbacks who want to try and get that second spot, I mean, they've got a serious guy along with them in Champ Bailey. I mean, surefire future Hall of Famer. So
someone to learn from.
Exactly.
But they expect him to really be an integral part of the defense this year. I mean, some have said that Patrick Robinson is going to have every opportunity to be able to start. Some have mentioned that John Baptiste is going to have a chance to be situational depth, will be brought in if they go nickel or dime. But I mean, again, a lot of people are putting their money on Champ Bailey and hoping he's going to be able to recover from his injuries and he'll have this type of season he had the year before and not last year. Katherine, what's your take on Bailey? What's your take on the overall secondary?
Well, I think that based on what Peyton said, they looked at Bailey's film and they really felt that foot injury was what held him back. You know, they're really banking, like you said, on the fact that he'll be able to return to form. And I think that he can. You know, he's obviously not getting any younger. So he doesn't necessarily need to be an every down player. He could be a rotational player. The Saints do that enough that it's not going to throw them off at all. And then you have young guys like Patrick Robinson, who coming into the offseason, I wasn't sure about his role on the team, but just watching OTAs, which usually don't tell us too much, it kind of told us a lot. They really want to give him all the chances in the world to make this happen. They're using him a lot, and I think that he's going to be someone to watch there. So they might have a lot of guys rotating at that spot.
Right, there's a serious logjam at that second quarterback spot. But yeah, it's a big year for Patrick Robinson. I mean, coming off that bad injury that he had, he's got this could be a very, very important year for him.
And ladies, I think you would agree that, you know, the one thing about having Champ Bailey here, it gives you a chance to groom a guy like Stanley Jean-Baptiste. He doesn't have to be thrown in the mix immediately. He can kind of grow, learn from obviously what's going on with the veteran presence that they have in the secondary, and maybe you count on him in year 2 and year 3 to be more of an impact player for you. This is kind of a make it or break it year for Patrick Robinson. Exactly. You know, if he can't really show something going into this camp, they're probably going to go with the younger guys, even though he's got a tremendous amount of skill set, but he just never has been able to take that from the practice field, the classroom, into game day.
Right.
It's just been one thing after another. That freak accident last year, he went into training camp hurt. The year before, he was kind of thrown into something that just it didn't work for him.
Put him at the slot.
Yeah, I mean, and just, well, obviously the whole defense didn't work for anybody, but, you know, Patrick Robinson just struggled. You know, you remember that game against the Cowboys where he had to cover Des Bryant and it was a disaster.
Disaster. That's a good way to describe that.
So, you really, it's it for him. He's got to prove himself this year. So, you know, I think there's a couple of guys like that. You know, Corey White isn't necessarily at that make or break point, but he's got a lot to prove too.
Oh yeah,
that's a guy that I think is more of a guy that can play the slot, big, rangy. And I thought he was a little out of position last year when they had to put him at corner and put him kind of stand alone, where he had to go one-on-one with, you know, one of the better receivers on the team. And you know, he kind of look, that Atlanta game, he really didn't play well, but he really kind of played much better after that.
He did. He kind of came into his own. What I think they liked about Corey White is he's a very aggressive player, and sometimes that's to his detriment. You know, he'll get these penalties, but I think that they're okay with that because they want him to play like that. Rob Ryan loves the way he plays, I think.
Rob Ryan wants that intensity on his defense. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, I think that he could be a player, you know, on the upswing. He can be inconsistent. It's hard to tell after just half a season. Is he going to be a good player or is he going to be an inconsistent player, you know? So,
Rich, can you add anything about Corey White or maybe Patrick Robinson?
Right. Yeah. I mean, like Katherine said, you know, Corey White does bring that aggressiveness. She took the words right out of my mouth there. But yeah. I mean, Rob Ryan likes to be able to mix things up on his defense. I mean, last year he was going to run a 3-4, but then they had so many injuries that they had to make adjustments there. And you know, we saw some 4-2-5, you know, some 3-4, even some 4-3 in there too. So, you know, it's going to be a great year though to see what this defense can do. I'm really excited.
Especially now with the addition of a Victor Butler, as you guys had mentioned a little bit earlier. Bona fide pass rusher, a guy that knows Rob Ryan's system, and a guy that was kind of an afterthought when you talk about coming this season. He could be a guy that could make an impact.
Sure, exactly. I mean, Victor Butler coming in and having the same background as Rob Ryan, you know, with Dallas, that was going to be a connection that fans were excited to see, but obviously didn't get to last year. But this year, you know, him coming back at one of those linebacker spots could be real good.
You got a little bit of a long jag there as well. You've got Cam Jordan, who's talking about 16 sacks now this year.
Yes, won a game, and he really wants to go to the Super Bowl because it's in Arizona.
Which I kind of like his attitude there.
Yes,
not really worried about, you know, he was more worried about obviously not worried about being an All-Pro, more worried about going to the Super Bowl or anything else. Right. But Katherine, you're talking about Victor Butler, you're talking about Junior Gillette, he's playing really kind of for a contract now.
Yes.
So you got three guys that can really rush the passer from the outside.
Yeah, Junior Gillette has got some incentives to play well next year or this year. You know, if he gets a certain number of sacks, he can opt out of that contract, and that's a big deal. You know, not that I don't really think he needs the incentive. He loves the game, definitely. But Victor Butler is such a question mark. You know, he and Kenyon Coleman came in to kind of usher in Rob Ryan's defense, and they weren't needed. You know, it went along just fine. And you know, in Dallas, he was kind of a role player. So how he fit in if they ask him to do more? I mean, we don't know. There's so much excitement about him because nobody knows. Right. And you don't know how he's going to come off that knee injury. I mean, so for me, it's just a question mark. You know, how is he going to fit in? And he's got 1 year to prove himself because he's got 1 year of that contract left.
Which is good for the Saints because, again, normally when a player is in a contract year, they're going to give everything they can and try to get as many stats out there so they can parlay that into a bigger deal.
Exactly.
Yes.
You know, so that's good news on that front. The center position. Katherine and Richard, we talked about it. Yeah. Jonathan Goodwin has been brought in. Everyone thought Tim Lito would be the heir apparent. He may still be. Yeah. But again, it doesn't hurt having a guy like Jonathan Goodwin. Rachel, your thoughts on bringing in Goodwin? Will this be a battle that will be in, you know, where the best man win, or are they really hoping that Lito ends up being the center here? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it was a fine move to bring back Goodwin. I mean, he's inexpensive, and you also get that veteran presence. I mean, the 13 years in the league, that's very, very valuable. And on this offensive line that kind of struggled at the beginning of last year before they kind of found themselves. And Terrell Armstead, of course, we know that was he had a rough way to start his NFL career, but then he kind of blossomed almost really after that. But anyway, about Goodwin and Lolito, I think Lolito will probably end up starting. I think, but in case something were to happen with him, you've got Jonathan Goodwin who already knows the offense. I mean, now granted the personnel is so much different, yes. but same idea. You can just tell talking to him that he was very excited. He loves New Orleans, loves to be back. So
didn't sell his house, which was
right, yes.
which is unreal.
Yeah. So I think it was a fine move to bring him back in. No harm in bringing back an inexpensive veteran to help out that line.
Do you have a different take on this? Do you think it'll be Lolito, or do you think it'll be Goodwin?
Well, my sense is if it's not Lolito, they have a problem, because then next year they have to find a center. Yeah. Goodwin, that like Rachel said, I agree that was a very good move. He knows the offense. He played a complicated offense with the 49ers, so I mean he'll be just fine transitioning back. But I think that they want Lolito to win that job, because if he can't beat out Goodwin, or if he can't win the job, or if he's not good enough, then what do they do at center next year? So, I think that Goodwin is the type of player that will try to guide him along and will help him. Sometimes you get these players that won't, and I don't think that's Goodwin's intentions at all. So I think that it's a good move. I think that they can work together, and Goodwin can teach them things that the coaches can't.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I am concerned about the depth on the offensive line, and I have been concerned going into the offseason. I don't think they've really addressed it. They got some guys that have been on the team for a few years now that really have not emerged as great depth for this team. They haven't really been tested with the first team in a lot of cases. But even if you get into a situation with Lolito, if he is the starter, who's the backup guard? Who's the swing guy there? That's a big problem. Katherine, your thoughts on the offensive line? Is there an update there, or is that one of the big question marks coming into this year?
Yeah, it is really thin. If Goodwin wins the job, that would almost be better for them. Contradicting what I just said, but I just mean that in the way that Lolito can be the backup guard and kind of swing at that spot. But they really don't have much depth now that Terrell Armstead replaced Charles Brown. So now if there's a problem with Armstead, I mean, you have Bryce Harris. I guess that if something happened to Armstead, they might move Streif over to left tackle and Bryce Harris to right. But, they really just don't have too many people behind him. There's Marcel Jones.
Who hasn't really done much.
Right. Not yet, but, I mean, we just don't know what he's got. So, and, Tavon Rooks, he's a rookie, but
we had to look up a bio about him. Yeah, we couldn't find anything about Rooks after he was drafted. But if that depth becomes an issue, then I mean,
is it an issue for you going into camp because of really the kind of unknowns as the backups?
Right, exactly. I mean, Lolito last year, at least his position on the roster was center/guard. So he can do both. But yeah, I mean, like Katherine said, Goodwin's got the experience at the center position that Lolito can talk to him, kind of have a veteran to help him at all if he needs any advice or whatnot at the center spot. But I mean, as far as Armstead, he'll have his second year to try and really settle in at that left tackle spot. I mean, he really after that Carolina game, he really kind of settled down, and that's going to be important. That's going to be very.
Well, he
wasn't
very important. Playing against Greg Hardy after
that's
that.
A good point.
Right? Yes.
That's a good point. But again, I don't know if anybody could have came into that situation as he did and be able to deal with it without a guy who was having a great year like that and be able to perform. But he did play much better. He did play much better down the stretch.
And he was playing hurt in the playoffs. He hurt his hand early against the Eagles and played every single snap with an injured hand that required surgery. So I think there's big things coming from him.
Yeah.
Katherine, I'll take you first. Any concerns you have position-wise going into camp? And I've mentioned one for me, the offensive line. The other one for me, as the audience knows that watches this show or listens to my radio show, is the wide receiver position, the ability to get off the jam. We saw over and over again last season the inability to do that. Now, again, you're going to have a quicker wide receiving core. Guys are not going to be able to maybe come up and maybe jam as much. But ultimately, they're going to test the physicality of the wide receiving core to make sure they're able to do it. And because it slows down down the Saints' rhythm offense, if you can stagnate them at the line of scrimmage, as you're looking in and at this team, when you start looking at position battles, when you look at the concerns, what concerns you have, if any?
Kind of the same things you just said. I think that the offensive line, the depth could become a huge concern if any one of them gets hurt. And the wide receivers, you add Cooks, which is great because that was kind of getting to be an aging group. Colston's probably their most physical wide receiver, the one that can take the most hits, go over the middle, but, he's getting older. And he obviously battled a lot of injuries last year. And, I think they're going to have kind of ration his training camp snaps because of that. It could be a concern. Can he make it through the season? So you're right. I mean, are they going to be physical enough? Is the Saints offense going to be able to be the same Saints offense it's been? Because I felt like in some ways they took a step back last year.
They did.
So, I think that those are two big question marks. Can they rush the passer as well as they did last year? I think that their defense might actually be a base 4-3 this year, which will be a change from last year.
Right.
But, every position you could look at and find an issue.
Right.
Overall, I think that they're in a pretty good position.
Right. Rachel, can you add anything? Do you have any concerns on going into camp, maybe positions that, that maybe they don't have enough depth? You take it from here.
Well, not as much a position battle, but something I'm going to really be interested in. Maybe not as much in camp. We'll see in preseason and in game action is how they balance running the ball with passing the ball. That's something that I've really keyed in on. We've got Kyrie Robinson. I'm really eager to see what he can do, and of course Pierre Thomas. He can be lethal in the screen game, and Cooks will be called on to contribute a lot in that. His burst, once he catches that,
make it a break
those
here
short
for Mark
pass.
Ingram here.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. When you've got Pierre Thomas and Kyrie Robinson in there, and even Cadet, going to be maybe taking some of those Sproles snaps. But Mark Ingram, he, with Sproles gone, I mean, he could also get some of those, running snaps. I guess maybe you could say, hey, that Sproles would have had. But Ingram hasn't really been a factor in the pass catching game, though. I mean, as much as Pierre Thomas and Sproles were. So, that I'm going to be watching the run game a lot, because when the Saints won the Super Bowl, they were in the top 10 in running the ball. So, and if you look at teams like Seattle and San Francisco, defense and balance on offense is what has really made them elite teams. So if the Saints can do that, then they're going to be serious contenders.
John Jenkins has a pectoral muscle surgery. It's kind of late in the offseason to have that. He did a great job for this team last year, and I really expected him to emerge. Is that a concern? Considering the position he plays, nose tackle, pectoral, a lot of times you're out for the year with that. Is that a concern for you?
Right, yeah. We saw Kenyon Coleman, was he the one that had the pectoral issue last season?
Now he's retired.
Yeah, I thought so. But yeah, I mean, when he wasn't getting any snaps during OTAs and minicamp, that was a little bit of a concern. But I mean, obviously a tough injury to
especially
rebound
for his
from.
position.
Right, exactly. Yeah. You've got Broderick Bunkley right in there at nose tackle, and he saw almost all of the first.
And Akeem Hicks.
Yes.
Hicks can slide around, but I don't know that there's anything. They said it was minor pectoral surgery, and I don't know if minor
pectoral surgery.
Yes. So, the fact that they don't want to talk about it, because I asked Peyton about it, and he didn't want to talk about it.
That's a shocker.
I know, right?
That really is.
Who doesn't want to talk about injuries? I mean,
I know. NFL
what else
coaches,
can we talk about right now?
NFL coaches love to share injury information. If he's not back on the field by training camp, then I think that's a sign that something is definitely majorly wrong. Minor pectoral surgery might have turned into major surgery. We obviously will try to find out more about that. But, Bunkley is capable.
Yes.
I think that they would rather have both of them.
Of course.
But, Bunkley was capable last year. He's not the long-term solution. I think Jenkins is.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I've had panelists on this program over the last few weeks that have mentioned kicker as a position to watch. Do you ladies agree with that? You know, a lot of people don't have a lot of faith in Shane Graham, rather. What do you guys think? I mean, kicker. I know we're talking about kicker. We got a couple weeks before camp,
well,
guys.
It's July.
But it's right. Yeah, exactly.
We have a couple weeks before camp. But is kicker a concern?
It's true. I mean, of course. I mean, we saw the perils of Garrett Hartley last year. But
Don't remind me.
but Shane Graham, you know, he came through against Philadelphia, and but just in off-season workouts, like when you try and see if they made or missed the field goal,
it's very hard to tell.
Yeah,
unless you're standing right behind it, it's hard to tell who actually made it.
Yeah.
Plus, you're not in the heat of battle.
It's totally different. It's not a game situation. But my opinion, I think people were a little hard on Shane Graham for that Seattle game. I've argued with people about this, about how the winds were swirling and things like that. But I talked to John Carney, and he said that was. I mean, if you watch the flags, the way they were moving, it was just they were hard kicks to make. So I think you can't write them off at all. But if they want to go younger, then Derek Dimke's right there. So it is a position battle to watch.
No, it is. Hard to believe you're actually, but it is. All right, West Virginia. I know you're excited. You get to go to West Virginia. We talked a little bit about it at the open of the show. Is it a good thing for this team to go in camp for the first 3 weeks with the hot New Orleans sun, the humidity, and obviously the rainy weather that we normally get? Is it good for them to be going up to West Virginia for 3 weeks?
All jokes aside, I am excited about West Virginia, and I think they are too.
Only because it's a spa, guys.
Hey, that doesn't hurt. But I think that it's really going to be a nice change of pace. It is already getting extremely hot down here. What was it, like 95 the other day?
You could fry an egg on the top of my car. You could.
They don't want to play in that. Right. They won't complain about it publicly, but they don't want to play in that. It's really hot in Metairie. There's no shade. West Virginia is going to be a good change of pace, and not only that, they're all going to be together. Everything is right next to each other, and it's going to be good for team bonding, I think.
Yes.
So I think that. Just like when they went to Millsaps a few years ago, Peyton likes to change things up, and I think that it's a good thing for the team.
Right.
Absolutely.
Rachel, you're excited about West Virginia?
Yes. No, I think it'll be, right, like Katherine said, a great change of pace, much better weather for them to start training camp off with. And, hey, you can't argue with the 10-degree drop in temperature, maybe even more. I'm not really sure.
About that.
But yeah, exactly. Not just for the players, but for media as well. And I'm sure some fans will find their way up there to have an excuse to check out West Virginia.
I don't think there's any doubt with that. I mean, an opportunity to check out that resort, number one, which is supposed to be a beautiful resort, Greenbrier, and they just had the golf tournament up there a couple of weeks ago, and of course they're laying out the carpet for them with the facility, building that facility for them, and with the hope that they'll make that a long-term deal of going back and forth. There are some of us that are kind of, again, those of us that are stuck behind a microphone that can't get up there, we would rather see them here in New Orleans. But I understand the mindset of trying to get them up in West Virginia. Both you guys agree this is going to be a good year for this team, barring any type of really catastrophic injury. Am I right?
Yes, I absolutely think so.
I think that it should be. I think that if it isn't, then something definitely went wrong. On paper, they should be better. Their defense should be better. Their offense should at least keep on pace with how their offense has been in the past. I mean, you have Drew Brees, and obviously, if he stays healthy, which is always the big key.
Fans always shudder whenever he hits the ground.
Well, and that's why there's some worry about the offensive line.
Right.
Because he is getting up in age, and you don't want him taking the hits that he took last year.
He took too many last year.
Too many.
Especially in the beginning of the year.
Right. And he's been, and look, I'm knocking on it, folks. He's been almost, in terms of injury, had no injuries here in New Orleans, and you don't want to get to a situation where obviously he's out for a couple games, and because that's gonna hurt this team.
Yeah, that's, I guess, another training camp battle. The backup
quarterback.
Backup quarterback and kicker. Those are the battles to watch.
But in the end, it doesn't really matter if, as Breeze goes, so goes the Saints.
Absolutely.
So whether it's Luke McCown or Ryan Griffin, well,
we don't want to see him.
Good luck.
And he says he feels like he's 25 years old,
right.
So,
ladies, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for coming down. Rachel Whittaker, Katherine Terrell of NOLA.com. Remember, you can, thanks so much for tuning in. You can catch the rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night here on WLAE TV and also on Pelican Sports Television at 10 o'clock. You can also catch me on the radio, 990 AM WGSO, weekdays 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. And also you can listen live or download the podcast at ericasher.com. If you missed any of the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports, you can catch those at ericasher.com as well. Special thanks to our guests, Rachel Whittaker and also Katherine Terrell. Also to our WLAE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Donovan Joseph, Kenny Juneau, my director, William Hill. My name is Eric Asher. Thanks so much for watching Inside New Orleans Sports. I'll see you next Thursday night. Good evening.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation, Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home, and Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House.